Hi everyone! Today I'm making witch hats as accessories for 3 stuffed animal cats that I wanted to be a bit more festive for October. I'll admit I have stuffed animals all over the place, so I have no shortage of heads to accessorize, but even if you don't, they make pretty cool decorations by themselves. I'm using black felt and white cardstock left over from greeting cards. You can take anything circular that's about the right size. I used a candle. Now cut out as many as you want, and then cut out the centers to make room for their heads so that they lay a little bit more naturally. It isn't necessary, but for cats like Kiki, that bow needs some room. But for cats like Chrono, his head is pretty flat, so he doesn't really need the extra room. Although we'll do it anyways. After you cut them out, glue them down to the black felt with some white tacky crafting glue. And cut them out, making sure to leave enough room around the outside of the brim. When I cut mine out, I didn't leave enough room, and that's a mistake that comes into play a little bit later on. Once I figure out how tall I want the hats to be, I measure and mark the felt with a white chalk pastel, and then fold the fabric in half, lining up the marks, and using the same measurement to create a mark in the middle, so I can get a nice even cut all the way across. Once you've cut everything out, it's time to glue. I'm using my favorite crafting glue, Fabri-Tac. It's a really gooey glue, but I like it for things like this because you can kind of fiddle with it after you've stuck things together, which is good for the tips of these hats, which are especially fiddly. Make cuts in the open end of the cone. This will create flaps that you can then attach to the brim, using more Fabri-Tac, of course. Oh boy, I made a mistake when I measured this. I wanted this witch hat to be shorter, but I used the 90-degree angle when I needed to use 180. It's an easy fix, so once I have the correct shape cut out, it's time to glue again. Follow the same steps as the last hat and put it all together. My third hat I want to be very tall, so I make it really long and only use a 90-degree angle because I don't need the base to be that big. And I did it again. But the great thing about Fabri-Tac is that you can pull it apart before it's dry and it doesn't damage the fabric. So I just cut it in half and then re-glued it. Now it's time to finish that pesky brim. Going around with my scissors, I make little cuts to create little flaps that I can glue down with the Fabri-Tac. And I mean little. This is why I should have left much more fabric overhang around the edge of the brim. That way I would have had a much easier time folding all of these edges over. But again, with Fabri-Tac, you can always go back and pinch it again, mush it, mess with it a little bit, and it'll always go into the place you want it to. And that one's ready to go. Repeat that for all 3 hats, and at this point, they could be done. But I have other plans. Using ribbon left over from another project, I create a belt around the base of the hat. Now I'm going to make a bow using a small piece of ribbon. I glue it together in this kind of shape, kind of like a Cancer ribbon, and then fold over the top and glue it down like that, and it creates the perfect little bow shape without having to tie a knot. And then I add a little piece right in the middle. Now I'm using some brightly colored moss to create some greenery crawling up to the top of the hat. This part is fun, but a little messy. The moss easily pulls apart, but leaves little crumbs everywhere. But just play around with it. Any pieces that are too big, you can trim with your scissors like a little bonsai tree. It's all about getting the right shape to match the picture in your head. Or you can use reference photos of a real tree or moss to get an idea of the shape you want. It was hard to find all the right pieces I needed to look like tree fungus, but using the scissors to trim the side you're gluing will help it look more natural. I went a little crazy, but I love nature, so I think this hat is the one that I would want to wear the most. And the best part about working with messy things? Getting to clean up. So we have the bow that we made earlier and a button left over from another project. Now normally I would attach the button using hot glue, or I would actually sew it onto the hat. But I was a little lazy, so I just filled the space behind the button with Fabri-Tac and hoped for the best. Then I add the pink bow as a finishing touch. And that's one hat down. So the first thing I do for the pink hat is to make another bow. The fabric I'm using is very slippery, so I have to fiddle with it a lot, but we're making the same shape as before. For this bow, we need to take some thread and tie around the center. As you tighten it, you'll see those creases that you want to appear. Now, just to tie it off, dang, this fabric is a pain to work with. So I have to wrap the thread around the center a couple times to keep it in place before I can actually tie it in a knot. Once everything's even, I'll attach a pearl to the center and this bow is done. Next, I add some hot pink ribbon as a belt. And then, off camera, I braided together some skinnier ribbon, leaving a loop at the beginning so it will attach to the top of the hat easier. And now I'm taking a mini satin rose and weaving the wire up through the braid. This will hide the wire and also make the braid posable later. I glued the ends of the ribbon down to make it look more finished. But then I decided on more roses. Instead of weaving the wires tediously through the braid again, I decided to use them to attach the roses to the braid. And now that everything's done, we can put it all together. I decided at the last minute to add some more satin roses to the tip of the hat. I was really trying to make this super cute. I add a pearl to the top and then attach the other end of the rose braid to the hat. Okay, I admit I didn't always know where this thing was going, but in the end, it all came together and it kind of reminds me of a teacup. The last hat I want to look really crooked, so I'm using a needle and thread to achieve that effect. After my first stitch, I line up where I want the hat to fold over and place another stitch parallel to the first. Then I go back down through my first stitch, and when you pull the thread, it creates the first crook. I add a few more stitches to anchor it, and we're ready to move on to the next crook. Instead of rethreading my needle again, I thread the needle carefully through the inside of the hat and have the needle come out where I want the next crook to be. On this one, I tried a crisscross stitch to see if it would work any better, but it barely worked. The box stitch I used for the first one is definitely your best bet. I ended up using it to redo this crook and the next one. After everything's anchored, it's time to thread the needle through the inside of the hat again and come out where the last crook is going to be. Instead of sewing this part, you can use Fabri-Tac and pinch the hat together where you want the crooks to be. But I feel like I can be a little bit more precise with the needle and thread. After just a couple stitches, everything's ready to tie off, and we're ready to decorate. I'm taking gears I got at a crafting store and gluing them on to give it a steampunky look. I'm trying to make some of them interlock so that it looks like they're connected and would move together. If only I could make them move. I use a strip of black vinyl for the belt and keep those gears going. Don't forget the back. Now, as a finishing touch, I wanted to have a feather, but of all the crafting supplies that I have hoarded, I don't have feathers. So I'm making one. Using the same cardstock as before, I sketch out the shape of the feather that I want, and then I cut it out. Once that's done, I make cuts on the sides to make it look more feathery. You can ruffle the edges with your fingers, bend them a little bit, and it'll make it even more fluffy looking. After that, I shade the shaft of the feather to give it a little more dimension. And it's ready to glue on. Well, a little trim first, then it's ready to glue. And that's the last hat done. Time to see what everybody looks like. I hope this got you a little more into the crafting spirit of the season. Thank you so much for watching my first video. Happy Halloween, and I'll see you next time.